This chart shows the S&P 500, an index tracking 500 of the largest publicly traded U.S. companies, under a pre-declared structural analysis, specifically documenting the record for cycle ID SP500-3-1. The underlying model tracks market behavior through a defined sequence of structural phases. For this specific cycle, the observed phase path moved from phase 1 directly to phase 3, and then back to phase 2. Phase 4 has not yet materialized. Furthermore, the 18-day initial trapezoid, the primary time window outlining this structural setup, has officially closed. Because the initial time boundary expired without final resolution, an objective visual audit is required to map the exact geometric state of the current cycle. Focusing on the left side of this technical framework, the structure initiates at two specific starting points: primary entry M at a price level of $6,831.25 and secondary entry PC at $6,761.14. Both trade sizes are calculated using a hypothetical capital base of $100,000. By factoring in the third triangle domain percentage and a set risk coefficient, a fixed multiplier used to assign trade weight, the model establishes a strict maximum allowed drawdown of $5,000. Drawdown represents the absolute maximum permitted capital loss for the entire cycle. That structural setup is bound by the large blue trapezoid you see here, which dictates a rigid 18-day primary deadline for the cycle to resolve. Within this geometry, the model plots exact upward objectives: target 1 at the lower boundary, target 2 at apex N, and target 3 at the trapezoid top, representing a peak price level of $7,015. These fixed coordinates establish the definitive baseline. Any future risk reallocation or structural measurement must be calculated against this exact initial grid. This updated visualization captures the subsequent market action. After the first trade opened at point M, the price declined to the $6,729 level. This specific drop activated scenario number 2, triggering the second trade at the lower PC entry. From that lower entry, the price reversed and climbed directly to $6,928. This peak, labeled Apex N, serves as the designated safe exit level, effectively completing phase 3 of the model. By reaching the N coordinate first, the cycle produced a chronological inversion. Phase 3 completed before the price could interact with the delayed mirror, which is the required trigger for phase 2. This specific movement from the PC entry up to target 2 locked in a realized expected profit of $2,136 for the secondary position. Executing that safe exit validates the internal geometry of the first phase, securing calculated returns before the overarching 18-day window expires. As this next visual shows, the price did not sustain its upward trajectory. Immediately after tagging the N level, the market turned sharply downward. Following that decline, the price eventually climbed back up to touch the delayed mirror, a predetermined horizontal resistance line, at $6,952, officially completing phase 2. However, the structure failed to reach the ultimate target 3 at the top boundary before the 18-day temporal limit fully expired. Missing that upper boundary does not break the model. Instead, it indicates the primary path has exhausted its momentum, transitioning the asset into a period of volatile structural oscillation. Looking at this expanded view of the data, the original 18-day blue trapezoid is now entirely in the past. Yet the asset continues to print new price data well beyond that initial deadline. Without the primary time constraint, the market enters a sequence of deep downward and upward swings, operating completely outside the original time frame. During these swings, the price repeatedly bounces between two specific horizontal levels, the original piece of C entry line and the lower target 1 boundary. When a market operates past its time limit while respecting these lower levels, it physically stress tests its mathematical risk floors rather than collapsing randomly. Returning to the chart data, this specific climb from the PC level to target 1 repeated exactly 3 distinct times. Each oscillation secured an expected profit of $1,099. Because the cycle is designed to mathematically adapt, these realized returns are continuously fed back into the baseline. This action systematically expands the maximum allowable drawdown for the entire structure, from the starting $5,000 to $7,136. That expanded drawdown physically lowers the structural failure point. Through a progressive floor adjustment, the expected low price dropped incrementally from 6,601 down to an ultimate floor 5 at 6,388. These repetitive price swings serve a mechanical purpose. By systematically reallocating risk, the market widens the mathematical tolerance required for the overarching cycle to remain intact. This composite chart illustrates the result of that widened tolerance. Massive new secondary geometries, highlighted in red and blue, now cleanly encompass the recent downward price action. This process is driven by hierarchical triangle recomposition. The initial smaller structures, labeled 1 and 2, mathematically merge to form the much larger Roman numeral I and II sectors. From this scaled perspective, the original failed blue trapezoid is no longer the defining boundary. It functions merely as a nested microcomponent within these newly established borders. Supported by a deeper risk floor, the structural field absorbed the time extension and mathematically evolved into a higher-order fractal state. A fractal state means the geometric rules governing the small initial price waves now apply identically to a massive overarching boundary. Examining the temporal axis of this chart, the geometry undergoes a multiplicative time expansion. The new macro boundary extends the cycle's life by an additional 23 days. This horizontal expansion also elevates the vertical target. The original safe exit at apex N scales up to generate a massive higher-order node, marked here as N1. That N1 node projects a precise absolute target of 7,224 on the S&P 500, a level the index has never previously touched. Reaching it requires a 10.5% directional move upward. By geometrically scaling its boundaries, the overarching cycle abandons the conservative initial exit and strictly targets that elevated absolute objective. Looking back at the chart's lower right quadrant, current price action sits deeply submerged, trading well below the primary support lines of the original setup. Yet because the progressive floor dropped to 6,388, this localized downward depth does not violate the structure. The overarching higher-order fractal geometry remains perfectly intact and mathematically active. As long as that floor holds, the N1 node at 7,224 acts as the singular defining upside objective for the entire expanded cycle. Short-term price volatility effectively loses its relevance, provided the dynamically adjusted geometric floor continues to contain the market. Returning to the temporal boundary on the chart, this extended structural phase operates under a strict deadline. The massive expanded trapezoid will permanently close on April 15, 2026. The requirements for validation are absolute. The index must meaningfully approach or physically touch the 7,224 target before that exact time expiration. Conversely, if the downward pressure breaks through the newly established floor 5, the geometry collapses, resulting in a complete structural failure. The parameters are entirely binary. The S&P 500 will either mathematically validate the existence of this massive structural extension, or it will permanently break the boundaries. This specific record is completely documented by the Market DNA analytical framework. This document represents a strictly observed structural hypothesis. It does not constitute financial advice, and personal funds should never be invested based on these geometric targets. Furthermore, operating with leverage above a factor of 10 is strictly prohibited under these structural parameters. The integrity of advanced market modeling relies entirely on the uncompromising, objective archival of public data before the timeline resolves.